Every modern European prime minister or president must wonder what it's like to be a wartime leader. Next best thing, be photographed next to one. Only Viktor Orban of Hungary was not clapping the Ukrainian president in Brussels today. Everyone else wanted to reach out and touch the sun. They longed to be close to him. Earlier, Volodymyr Zelenskyy shook hands with European Parliament staff before entering the chamber to a standing ovation from MEPs, some holding up the Ukrainian colours.
Slava Ukraine!
Glory to Ukraine, he said, on the brink of tears. This is a man who knows how to tailor a message to an audience. He cast Ukraine's candidacy to join the European Union as an integral part of victory over Russia, just as yesterday in London he related it all to World War II and Britain's finest hour.
We don't rely on words, we act. We do not retreat before the enemy, we stand. We don't waste time, we are changing, and we make changes. Europe will always remain free as long as we are together and as long as we take care of our Europe, take care of the European way of life.
3,000 miles to the east, in the Siberian city of Omsk, the deputy head of Russia's Security Council was inspecting a tank production plant. In recent days, Russia has made advances in Ukraine, and the leadership is keen to belittle the Ukrainian president's attempts to acquire advanced weaponry from his European allies.
Yesterday, as you know, our enemy was begging for aircrafts, missiles, tanks abroad. What should we do in response? It's clear and natural for us to increase the production of various types of weapons and military equipment, including modern tanks. We're talking about the manufacture and modernization of thousands of tanks.
On the outskirts of Bakhmut, Ukrainian forces fire Soviet-era howitzers. Although President Zelenskyy said today that European countries have promised more modern weaponry, including possibly fighter jets, the Ukrainians fear that Russia has seized the momentum by pouring in thousands more troops.
Long-term peace in Europe will only happen when Ukraine achieves victory and becomes an EU and NATO member. This is the kind of unity we managed to build today. Unity in the fact that the EU will be with Ukraine until Ukraine's victory, and Ukraine will be part of the EU.
Joining the EU is a long-term aim, but Zelenskyy's message is urgent. He needs weapons, not just the look of love.
Well, earlier I spoke to General Sir Richard Barrons, a former commander of the UK's Joint Forces Command. I asked him first whether the Ukrainians were right to fear Russia's much-touted spring offensive, the mobilisation of up to 500,000 military personnel.
Yes, they are right to fear it, and we should be clear the spring offensive by Russia has started. There's much more activity now in Luhansk than there has been for some considerable time. We are, to a degree, relying on how last year went, that the Russians didn't perform very well. We should assume, however, that the Russians have learnt from the experience last year, that they've spent the winter gathering resources, and they may not repeat the mistakes they made last year. And it would be much better if we knew the outcome of this year relied on Ukraine being strong enough to defeat the Russians, not hoping the Russians aren't any good.
Hence Ukraine's request for jets. The UK government, Rishi Sunak, says that we could send jets to Ukraine. Is that an empty promise, or is it an act of leadership in your view?
So I think what the Prime Minister said is we can train pilots to fly advanced jets. And he's asked the Defence Secretary to look at what jets we could supply. Where this is going to come back to is the fact that the two fast jets that the UK has, the Typhoon and the F-35, are really not suitable for Ukraine. They are very difficult to fly, very difficult to maintain, and it would require an independent logistic chain. What Ukraine needs is pilots, which we could help train, but it needs aircraft like the US-made F-16, which is simpler to fly, simpler to operate, and exists in far larger numbers. But the US, so far, is not releasing F-16s.
Where does this end up, in your view, in terms of UK involvement?
So I think we're clear where we are going to be this year, which is we're going to see a Russian offensive now, If that is stopped successfully by the Ukrainians, we'll see a Ukrainian offensive. Neither of those look to me to be likely to be very decisive. So this war, more likely than not, will go into next year and maybe the year beyond. And we should be absolutely clear. If the UK and other countries stop supporting Ukraine, Ukraine loses and then we all lose.
We've already offered tanks, sent tanks, offered jets, potentially with all the caveats we just discussed. Does all of this leave us more exposed militarily?
So we know right now the Prime Minister is considering our own defence posture through the review of the integrated review. We know our armed forces are at the bottom of a trajectory of hollowing out and decline that we've been following since the end of the Cold War in 1990, in some cases for very good reasons. But every other major European country except the UK has made really significant announcements about how they're going to raise their own defence. And the UK, in its own interest, I think, is really going to have to follow suit.
And you talked about hollowing out. The Pentagon reportedly no longer regards the British Army as a top-level fighting force. Is that an assessment you would make?
It is an assessment I would share. It's been exacerbated by doing the right thing, of giving Ukraine most of the working tanks and most of the heavy artillery pieces. But we should recognise that the army right now would need 5, maybe 10 years to be ready to deal with a major Russian attack on Europe.
And so if that was to come to pass, we would be in no position to defend ourselves right now.
We are in no position to deal with a war with a great power, whether it's Russia or another country. Now, we know why this is so, but now we absolutely have to put it right.